Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are breaking down one of the most shocking and controversial claims to hit global politics in recent years. A claim so explosive that it instantly dominated headlines, rattled markets, and sent diplomatic shock waves around the world. According to Donald Trump, the United States has captured Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro following military strikes on the country. If this claim is true, it would represent a historic and unprecedented moment, not just for Venezuela, but for the entire Western Hemisphere. Trump described the operation as swift, decisive, and the result of weeks of escalating pressure and covert movements. He framed it as the final blow against what Washington has long labeled a criminal regime. In his words, the era of Maduro's rule ended abruptly, replaced by what he called a new opportunity for freedom and democracy. The announcement spread rapidly across international media, with analysts scrambling to verify details and governments rushing to respond. Venezuela has long stood as a symbol of resistance to U.S. influence in Latin America. For years, Maduro survived crushing sanctions, international isolation, internal unrest, and repeated efforts to remove him from power. His ability to remain in control despite economic collapse and political pressure made him a central figure in global debates about sovereignty, intervention, and authoritarian resilience. That is why this claim, if confirmed, would mark a dramatic reversal of fortune. Trump asserted that U.S. forces carried out targeted strikes on key military and intelligence locations before capturing Maduro alive. The idea of a sitting president being seized by foreign forces is extraordinary. It immediately raises serious questions about international law, national sovereignty, and the rules that govern state behavior. Even in a world accustomed to conflict, this would cross a line rarely seen in modern history. Supporters of Trump were quick to praise the move. They argue that Maduro transformed Venezuela into a narco-state, crushed political opposition, rigged elections, and presided over one of the worst economic collapses in modern times. From this perspective, capturing him is not an act of aggression, but a form of justice long delayed. To them, it represents accountability finally catching up with a leader they view as untouchable for too long. Critics, however, see the situation very differently. They warn that such an operation could destabilize the entire region. Latin America has a long and painful memory of U.S. interventions, and many governments fear this could reopen old wounds. There are concerns that this action could trigger retaliation, fuel anti-American sentiment, and lead to prolonged instability that affects multiple countries. Trump insisted that the strikes were precise and limited. He claimed they were aimed only at military and intelligence targets loyal to Maduro, and that civilians were not the target. He described the operation as cleaner and faster than previous regime change efforts, suggesting lessons had been learned from past conflicts. Whether those claims hold up under scrutiny remains a critical question. Inside Venezuela, reactions are reported to be deeply divided. Some citizens allegedly poured into the streets celebrating, believing that years of hyperinflation, food shortages, and political repression might finally be coming to an end. For these people, the capture of Maduro represents hope, relief, and the possibility of rebuilding a broken nation. Others responded with fear and anger. To them, regardless of Maduro's failures, a foreign power arresting their leader is seen as an invasion and a humiliation. For this group, the issue is not just about Maduro as an individual, but about national dignity and sovereignty. They worry that this moment could mark the beginning of deeper chaos rather than recovery. One of the biggest unanswered questions is the role of the Venezuelan military. Trump implied that parts of the armed forces either stood down or quietly cooperated. If true, this would suggest that years of internal fractures finally reached a breaking point. Maduro's grip on power depended heavily on military loyalty, and once that loyalty weakened, the entire system became vulnerable. If sections of the military did indeed step aside, It would explain how such an operation could unfold so quickly. It would also signal a profound shift inside Venezuela's power structure. However, without independent confirmation, this remains speculation. The true stance of the armed forces could determine whether the country moves towards stability or descends into further conflict. International reactions added another layer of tension. Russia and China, both longtime allies of Maduro, reportedly reacted with alarm. Any U.S. action of this magnitude threatens their strategic interests in the region and challenges their vision of a multipolar world order. Moscow condemned the move as illegal and warned of consequences, while Beijing called for restraint and respect for sovereignty. These responses hint at broader global implications beyond Latin America. What happens in Venezuela could influence power dynamics far beyond its borders. It raises the risk of escalating tensions between major powers at a time when the global order already feels fragile and contested. Trump framed the capture as a warning to authoritarian leaders everywhere. He suggested that no leader is untouchable and that the United States is willing to act decisively when diplomacy fails. This message resonates strongly with his political base, particularly those who favor a hardline approach to foreign policy. For them, this moment reinforces Trump's image as a leader who acts boldly rather than negotiating endlessly. At the same time, the legal implications are enormous. Capturing a foreign head of state raises complex questions about jurisdiction and international law. Trump hinted that Maduro could face trial, possibly in the United States, on charges related to drug trafficking, corruption, and human rights abuses. Such a scenario would be unprecedented in modern history and would likely face intense legal challenges. Within the United States, reactions were sharply divided. Some lawmakers praised the move as bold, decisive, and long overdue. Others accused Trump of reckless escalation that could drag America into another prolonged conflict. Human rights organizations expressed concern about civilian casualties, transparency, and the long-term impact on Venezuelans caught in the middle of geopolitical power struggles. The economic impact was immediate. Oil markets reacted nervously, given Venezuela's vast reserves and fragile production capacity. Any prolonged instability could disrupt supply and ripple through global energy prices. Neighboring countries such as Colombia and Brazil are watching closely, aware that economic shocks and migration flows could quickly spill across borders. Migration is another critical issue. A stable, post-Maduro Venezuela could eventually reduce the flow of refugees who have fled economic hardship. But if the country descends into chaos, millions more could be forced to leave, placing enormous strain on neighboring states and humanitarian systems already under pressure. Trump's announcement also raises a crucial question about what comes next. Capturing a leader is one thing, but rebuilding a nation shattered by years of crisis is another challenge entirely. There is no clear, detailed plan for Venezuela's political transition. Opposition leaders have long been divided, and without unity, the risk of a dangerous power vacuum is very real. Trump suggested that a transitional government supported by the Venezuelan people would be allowed to form. History, however, shows that such transitions are rarely smooth. Rival factions, militias, and criminal networks could compete for control, potentially plunging the country into deeper instability rather than peace. For Trump personally, this announcement fits a familiar pattern of dramatic headline-grabbing moves. Whether fully accurate or exaggerated, it instantly reshaped the political narrative and captured global attention. Supporters see it as proof of strength and resolve. Critics see it as destabilizing bravado with unpredictable consequences. The credibility of the claim remains a central issue. Until independent verification emerges, questions persist about where Maduro is being held and under what authority. Venezuelan state media reportedly issued conflicting messages or went silent, fueling confusion and speculation among the population. If Maduro is indeed in U.S. custody, it would symbolize the collapse of a regime that once defied sanctions, protests, and international isolation. It would mark the end of an era that shaped Venezuelan politics for decades, but if the claim turns out to be overstated or false, the fallout could be severe, damaging U.S. credibility and inflaming tensions unnecessarily. The broader lesson here is how fragile global stability can be. One announcement, one operation, can reshape alliances, markets, and the lives of millions. For Venezuela, this moment could represent the beginning of renewal or the start of a darker chapter of uncertainty. For the United States, it tests the limits of power and the consequences of acting unilaterally on the world stage. It forces a reckoning with how far a nation should go in the name of democracy and security, and what costs are acceptable in pursuing those goals. For the rest of the world, this situation is a reminder that geopolitics is entering an era where bold moves carry enormous risks. The balance between deterrence and escalation has never been more delicate. Leaders everywhere are watching closely, calculating what this precedent could mean for their own security. As more details emerge, the true impact of this claim will become clearer. Whether this is remembered as a decisive strike for democracy or a dangerous escalation will depend entirely on what follows. The coming days and weeks will reveal whether stability, justice, and recovery are possible, or whether prolonged turmoil lies ahead. What is certain is that the capture of a sitting president, if confirmed, would redefine modern intervention. It would set a precedent that future leaders, strategists, and historians will study carefully. Until then, the world watches closely, waiting to see how this unprecedented chapter in Venezuela's history truly unfolds.